So yeah, my name is Jacob Stone. I'm a graduate student at the University of California, Santa Cruz. So right nearby Doug, actually. And today I just wanted to share some of my dissertation research that I've been working on, focused on the site of this Redmond-Hirahara farmstead, as it's called today, in Watsonville, California, right here in the Monterey Bay area. And today I'm going to talk mostly about sort of the ethnographic history of the house and Watsonville and the Watsonville community. And there is a sizable collection of artifacts from this site, but I won't be talking as much about that today, but I would welcome any questions at a later time about that, if you'd like. And so to start off, I just want to sort of zero in on the region we're talking about. So here you can see Watsonville kind of right around the Monterey Bay, and here's Santa Cruz. So about an hour south of San Francisco is where we're looking in California. And really the dense Japanese immigration into this region begins in the very late 1800s and early 1900s. This is primarily young Japanese men coming to work on farms, railroads, mines, plantations, and they actually really revolutionized the abalone fishing strategies here in Watsonville and Monterey. So really a strong impact in this area. And as this population grew in Watsonville, though, and as competition then grew between these newly leased farms and the existing farms, so too did sort of tensions rise in the city of Watsonville, and many people were unhappy with this growing community they found in their city. And in fact, the Japantown that was forming here in the early 1900s in Watsonville ends up becoming one of the largest in the region. And when I say the region, I do mean those counties we're kind of looking at here, the Pajaro Valley region. And Sandy Leiden suggests that in the decades following between 1910 and 1940 or so, it becomes one of the largest urban concentrations of Japanese, with over 400 Japanese people living in Watsonville City proper. And here's just some census data showing this steady increase in population, of course, until we get to 1940 and the incarceration era, and then following the incarceration 1950s, we do see a decline, but yet we do see a sizable chunk of people who were incarcerated from Watsonville actually return. And here's just a quick look at this Japantown from roughly 1920. And it's hard to read the little text, but these bolded structures are the Japanese-owned businesses. And here is Main Street that goes straight through the middle of Watsonville. Kind of here, we're looking at the south end with the Pajaro River right here on the bottom that then continues the Main Street onto this side of the map. And this was actually where the Chinatown was previously. So the quote unquote Japantown sort of expanded on the existing Chinatown, which was already facing, like I said, a lot of prejudices from the white community in Watsonville. And there's a huge range of businesses actually that were established here in Watsonville, ranging from barber shops, marketplaces, churches, Japanese language school, and this is actually where the Japanese American Civilians League still exists today in Watsonville, the Watsonville chapter. And now I want to, bring in the Redman-Hirahara farmstead to this sort of period here. And you have a couple images. On the left, this would have been shortly after the home was built on the farmstead, this beautiful Victorian mansion with the Redmond family here on the porch in about 1905. As compared to on the far right here, which is an image from 2005 when the house was actually excavated. It looks much like this today. Just a little more sunny today. And in the middle, we have a top-down view of Watsonville City here. So this was about 1965. Here's Highway 1, and it connects to Main Street down the center of Watsonville. So here was that Japantown we were just looking at on the south side of Watsonville. And here, this blue circle is actually where the farmstead is located. And the fact that it was actually west of this Highway 1 and Main Street demarcation will be important to our story going forward. So here's some history of the farm. So the Redmond family, John Redmond, worked on the farm. It was about 115 acres when he purchased it in 1883. So he worked on the farm for about 15 years before contracting someone to build this Victorian farmstead in 1897. John Redmond continued to live there with his wife, Ela Redmond, until John passed away in 1921 and Ela subsequently passed away in 1937. And it was at this time that the house was put up for auction and purchased by Katsumi Tao, who was a Japanese gentleman living in Watsonville at the time, and happened to be close friends with the Hirahara family. The Tao family was married into the Hirahara family in a few different places. And this was probably why Katsumi was able to just sort of pass down the farmstead to Fumio Hirahara in 1940. So Fumio was 16 at the time, born in the United States to his parents who were living in Watsonville. And so Katsumi gave it to Fumio, who was able to put his name and own the property, unlike his parents, first generation Japanese immigrants, for a mere $10. And the family went with Fumio, his parents, and 8 of his siblings. So 11 total family members moving into the farm in 1940. But of course, this was really close to the incarceration protocols that were enacted. So the Hirahara family actually had a series of smaller travels between 1940 and 1941, actually. And actually on the right, you'll see this wonderful family tree made by Katsuji Hirahara. And you'll see the parents, Matoshi and Teo, and some of the children who were originally working on the farm. But pretty uniquely, when the exclusion orders started happening in Watsonville, there was a unique caveat to it, which said all people of Japanese ancestry must move east of that main street. So that main street that was dividing the Japantown in half, and of course the Hirahara family, who were pretty far to the west of Main Street, were forced to get east of that demarcated line. So the Hiraharas actually, within a year of moving into their new house, moved back to Watsonville, east of the main street, where they were able to rent a home. And they actually continued moving east, just sort of because of the climate in Watsonville. They were trying to avoid some prosecution that was going on. And so they moved to Fresno. And from Fresno, they were sent to the Fresno Assembly Center and then to the Jerome camp all the way in Arkansas, which is also another unique part of the story, as most of the people in Watsonville were sent to the Salinas Temporary Center and then to Poston in Arizona. So the Hiraharas are kind of a unique situation there because of their travels. And Jerome closed earlier than most camps in June 30, 1944, where they moved the majority of the residents to the Rower camp, which was a couple miles nearby. And at this time, actually, some of the Hirahara family were able to diverge, including Fumio, who went to Chicago at this time, seeing as they were out of the exclusion zone during these movements. But the rest of the family stayed in the Rower camp until 1945, when they were able to return to their farmstead in Watsonville. And here's a photo of them upon their return on those front porch steps that we saw before. And the Hiraharas are also pretty lucky to have a lawyer and gardener who were willing to look after the property and the acreage that they had on the farm while they were away. So they were able to kind of arrive home and move back into their house. However, many people returning to Watsonville did not have the same luck, including the Hane family, who Akihiro Hane is pictured here on the bottom left from an interview he did in 2008 or so. And the Hanes were family friends of the Hiraharas, but they returned to Watsonville and found their home to be inhospitable to them. It was either rented out to someone else or actually looted while they were away. And the Hiraharas allowed the Hane family to reside in their carriage barn just south of the farmstead. So seeing a group of, a number of Japanese families that they knew before the incarceration, returning back to their homes and having a really difficult time, the Hiraharas kind of opened up their house and some of the empty properties they had on the farmstead for them to live in. And this is where the story sort of really fascinates me, with this collection of families moving into some of the properties. And some of the ethnographic interviews from the Hirahara family suggest there could have been as many as half a dozen different families or independent laborers staying in these spaces behind the barn. And so the Victorian was actually excavated in 2005 because they wanted to raise it from its foundation and move it because of some expansion and construction going on in the area. So this was conducted by Cabrillo College here in Santa Cruz. And 4 main trenches were placed around the house, which had thousands of artifacts recovered. But from my analysis of these artifacts, they're sort of ranging from very early 1900s all the way through roughly 1960 or so. So a really wide range and not a very strong stratigraphic context to really delineate these timeframes and the different habitation cycles that happened here. And so because of that, 2 main contexts that I really want to bring into focus today on the property is one, the carriage barn, and one, a garden that was constructed here. So first, let's start with the barn. So this is where the Hane family were staying. And here's a sort of depiction of the layout of the barn when the Hanes were living here from Akihiro. And we can see some other names, Tao and Koda families also staying at different times. And while the barn here, this was a photo of it in 2005, you can see it was already in pretty rough shape. It is no longer standing today. But while they were excavating it, they were able to sort of survey the barn. And while they didn't put any actual units or excavate into the ground there, they did remove a good number of these textual documents that were found all along the walls of the barn. And so there's a couple different theories behind these text documents. This series of images here is hopefully supposed to show you how it was really a series of different layers of different texts. So including English newspapers from Watsonville to Japanese texts and Japanese newspapers from the same period here to wallpaper, layers of just wallpaper. So this series of different texts over the top of one another. So this could have been to just sort of maybe separate some of these spaces in the barn, maybe to make it a little more homey, or in some cases, it could have been to sort of cut these connections to Imperial Japan. Many Japanese families and the Hiraharas themselves were very keen on the fact that the military was looking for Japanese leaders in the community and people who may have had these ties to Imperial Japan. And one of these pamphlets, actually, here's a page taken here. This would have been a full booklet that was still together and stuffed behind some of this wallpaper and other English texts. And this is thought to be this autobiography of this Japanese gentleman who was a leader in Imperial Japan. And so the thought here is that perhaps some of these documents were actually purposely hidden behind some of these wallpapers and other texts in the barn to sort of reduce suspicion in the area. The next context I want to talk about is the garden, actually, that was built just southwest of the house. Here we have, this was actually mostly Mitoshi, so the father who returned, and this was only created after the family came back from Rower, from the incarceration, which is kind of interesting. So whether this was a practice that he picked up in Rower in one of the camps, or not is not exactly clear, but he wanted to make a nice bonsai garden when he returned home. And here we do have a small collection of artifacts from this assemblage. That's actually what I'm working through right now at school. And, you know, things ranging from some of these small ceramic sherds to modern glass bottles, and even some planter tags with some of the Japanese text showing what plants were grown here and where. So really interesting spot to look at, sort of a continuation through time, with the carriage barn and the garden really representing this post-incarceration context, where the main trenches around the house really showcase early 1900s all the way through the incarceration and sort of onward. So I'm hoping to use these contexts to sort of compare and contrast the assemblages in these different time frames and check out some patterns evolving there. And so to conclude my talk, I'm actually talking in collaboration with the Hirahara family and some of the Watsonville community, the JACL there, talking about the potential of further excavations on the site, particularly in the context of the carriage barn, because we have such a good idea of where exactly it was located and the domestic areas where people were staying. It could be a pretty non-intrusive excavation going on there to really add to this post-incarceration aspect of the collection. But also just thinking about this really strong community of Watsonville and how this home, the Hirahara Farmstead, you know, which is a home for them, really becomes this place of historical significance and community rebuilding following the incarceration. And a really interesting example for me of how the community can come together to support one another in Watsonville, and how the Hirahara families can support some of their friends in the area. So thank you very much. That's all for me today. Here's some acknowledgements for everyone who's helping me out. Thank you.